On this slide, I want you guys to underline the Reconstruction Act. Congress will pass this act over Johnson's veto once again, and the Reconstruction Act will divide the South into 5 military districts, call for the creation of new state governments, and require that the states ratify the 14th Amendment in order to be readmitted into the Union. The Reconstruction Act was the last approach by radical Republicans in order to bring about equality in the United States. The title of the slide is called Reconstruction by the Sword, and that's code for Reconstruction by Force. Usually, force will be met with resistance, opposite and equal, if not overwhelming reaction with force as well. When you force people to do something, they will probably do it, but you carry with that the possibility of anger and resentment and hostility towards that force. And the South will definitely respond with those attitudes at heart. As far as Northern or radical Republicans are concerned, the inability for Southerners to accept emancipation and to accept the equality of those newly freed slaves is a reality that they now have to face. The Reconstruction Act will, in essence, initiate a phase in American history known as radical Reconstruction. And that's this term down here. And it's going to last all the way up until 1877. Okay, so the southern parts of the United States are now being occupied again by the military until we see some progress towards equality, the acceptance of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Now, if you recall, the Reconstruction Act required military occupation. Johnson, in his attempt, and knowing that Johnson's veto was overridden, Johnson understands that he is the commanding chief of the armed forces, and he, under that, believes that if he can choose who his Secretary of War is, he will be able to take a more lenient stance on this occupation. He'll be able to have say and jurisdiction on this military occupation. And so what Johnson wanted to do was remove the current Secretary of War and pick his own Secretary of War. And the argument for that was the following, that when he entered office and Lincoln was able to select the cabinet. Now that Johnson was president, he felt that he should be able to pick and choose who his new cabinet members were. And Congress was aware that Johnson was considering this option in an effort to kind of handicap the Reconstruction Act. So Congress will pass what is known as the Tenure of Office Act. And this act states that if you have been appointed to a position, you are allowed to fulfill that position, the tenure of that position, as long as you haven't committed any type of crime. Individuals have already been appointed to Lincoln's administration, and under the Tenure of Office Act, their tenure would be protected for that time as long as they haven't committed any crime. Johnson, despite the passage of that Tenure Act, is going to remove the Secretary of War in violation of that Tenure Act. Congress knew that he would do something as silly as that, and now Congress feels like they have charges of impeachment that they can wield against Johnson to the Senate. The House will impeach the president. This will be the first impeachment of an American president, and he will fail to be convicted by one vote. And a lot of that stemmed from the fact that, you know what, there was an election coming around the corner. In the election of 1868, the Republican Party simply says that they want nothing to do with Andrew Johnson, and that will be the end of his political career with Republicans. The Republicans are going to nominate Ulysses S. Grant. If you recall, Grant was the U.S. general during the American Civil War. and Grant will win, but by a slim margin. And what that should tell you in 1868 is that Republicans were losing some footing to Democrats for various reasons. We could point to the resurgence of racism, the problems or the holes in Reconstruction, but nonetheless, by 1868, we're going to have a new president. Johnson is out, Grant is in, and Grant will try to be more in line with radical Republicans. By 1870, we will have the 15th Amendment passed, which prohibits the government from denying any citizen the right to vote. Now, what exactly does radical Reconstruction look like in the South? Well, new constitutions were written with substantial Black representation. Over 2,000 African Americans will occupy public office during this period of Reconstruction. Hiram Revels will become the first Black senator in 1870. Another will be elected in 1875. And since that time, only 3 more, for a total of 5. One after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, and the last one being Barack Obama in 2005. So when you look at that last bullet, from 1870 to 2005, we have only had 5 Black senators. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how is it or why is it we were able to have 2 before 1875, and then only 3 from 1875 to 2005? And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the failure of Reconstruction will create a system of discrimination throughout the United States, limiting access and opportunity for African Americans in the political arena of America. That's just the reality. If you look at the date here, 1875, that's 2 years before radical Reconstruction ends. So a lot was done during this period of radical Reconstruction. As Du Bois would argue, it's referred to as Black Reconstruction. This was the first time in which you saw cooperation between whites and Blacks, politically, socially, economically, in all aspects of American society. We had never seen it before, and it was an endeavor pushed forth by white Americans, radical Republicans, and African Americans who were willing to take the risk, and that risk being death, or to exercise their rights as American citizens. Now, there will be many race riots that take place because of radical Reconstruction. There's the Colfax Massacre. There are other massacres or riots that take place in parts of the Deep South. And this is just reality that many African Americans have to live under during this period of Reconstruction, and obviously the failure of Reconstruction moving forward. At this time, please underline the Ku Klux Klan. If there ever was an agency or organization that would carry out those threats of violence, that would be this here. Blacks were assaulted and murdered for refusing to give way on the street. Blacks were murdered and assaulted for using language that was not typically afforded them before the end of the American Civil War. African Americans were targeted, assaulted, and murdered for exercising their rights by purchasing land, moving into a neighborhood. And much of this assault, much of this terror came from the Ku Klux Klan, formed around 1866 in Tennessee, led by planters, merchants, Democratic politicians. The Klan committed some of America's most brutal acts of violence against those sympathetic to Black equality and Blacks themselves. The Klan, ladies and gentlemen, is a terrorist organization. You have to understand why the Klan was created. They are a response to the notion that 4 million newly freed slaves thought that they were equal. That's why this organization is created, often referred to as the Invisible Empire, because you don't know how many there are. You don't know at what levels of society do they exist. And they may go to sleep. They may be at slumber. But the beast or the the dragon, if you will awaken when necessary. And what I mean by that is during the presidency of Grant, understanding that this was a terrorist organization, he will utilize or authorize the use of force against the Klan, resulting in the arrest of hundreds of Klansmen and the eventual slumber of Klan around 1872, 5 years before the end of Reconstruction. Look, the Klan doesn't need to exist if they feel that the threat has subsided. The Klan emerged because a threat emerged. The Klan, you can make an argument. You can make an argument that, well, Grant got rid of the Klan. Okay, fair enough. Or maybe the Klan ceased to exist because there were other elements in society that would be able to enforce what the Klan ultimately wanted, and that was the establishment of a second-class status for people of color. The Klan doesn't need to terrorize you and negate you if the police can do it, if judges can do it, if restaurants can do it, if the state government can do it, if the federal government can do it. The Klan doesn't need to exist wearing white sheets and white hoods if they can wear police uniforms, if they can wear judges' robes, if they can wear a teacher's badge. So I would argue that with the failure of Reconstruction, the Klan succeeded and therefore no longer needed to be around. Like when you get sick, you'll take medicine. And once you are cured of that illness, do you continue taking that medicine? You probably won't, because it's worked or the threat has subsided. In this particular case, the threat of African American equality will subside with the failure of Reconstruction. The bottom line is the following. The rapid growth of state budgets and the benefits to be gained from public aid led to influence and bribery. Rebuilding America cost a lot of money. This money will come from taxpayers. When there's a lot of money on a table, there's a tendency to lose track of it all. You forget, oh, I spent 10 here, or I spent 20 there, or what happened to the 50 I had over here? When you have a lot of money, you tend to not look at it. I don't live that lifestyle, so I'm kind of I'll look at my bank account like, no, wait a minute, I thought I had $1. That's how I'm looking at it. That's how I'm moving. But man, if you got, if you're Bill Gates, you're not worried like, oh, wait a minute, is it 19 trillion or is it 18.5 trillion? So a lot of times influence and bribery and theft can take place. Corruption can take place, and for the American taxpayer, they cannot handle that notion that their money is being misspent. And again, there will be attitudes prevalent in America that there is wasteful spending to assist people who do not want to assist themselves. That's the attitude that many racist whites will have towards these newly freed slaves. Taxes needed for public reconstruction resulted in many poor whites turning against the Republican Party and aligning themselves with the Democratic Party. But the bottom line is this. The most basic reason for opposition came from white Southerners who just simply could not accept the idea of black equality to that of whites. The bottom line for Reconstruction's failure will be this notion of racism. The resurgence of racism will embolden Southern Democrats and scare Northern Republicans, as many of them are dying off. Thaddeus Stevens will pass away. Charles Sumner will pass away. And then on top of all of that, on top of this massive reconstructive program, we enter an economic depression. So times are now tough. Money is tight. And the Democratic Party will take control of the House in 1874. So let's look back again. We look back at when the Klans supposedly went to slumber around 1872. Again, they don't need to be wearing white hoods and white sheets if they're wearing suits as they take take their seats in the House and in the Senate. The Democratic Party will take control of the House in 1874, and it appeared that the tides were turning in regards to the balance of power, shifting back to that antebellum era. Ante meaning before, bellum meaning war. So the attitude here is because of an economic depression, because of the resurgence of racism, and because of the fear of losing power. Radical Reconstruction will come to an end, and it almost appears that the Old South is being resurrected. At this time, I want you guys to be aware and underline what is known as the disputed election and bargain of 1877. I want us to be aware of all of this. So we're going to look at the election, and then we're going to look at the bargain. Now, in this election, it's incredibly close. We have the Democratic Party, who has Tilden as the nominee. The Republican Party will have Hayes as the nominee. And the election was too close to call. When it came to electoral votes, they were 50-50 straight down the middle. Now, when it came to the popular vote, the Democratic Party had the slight edge. So if it was going to go to the House, well, we know that the Democratic Party is in charge of the House. So the issue of the presidency was a major issue, resulting in the end of Reconstruction. Democrats knew that if they wanted to push it, they could win this presidential election. But here's what they do. They decide not to dispute the election. They decide that a bargain can be struck, and that they will allow Republicans to maintain the presidency if Democrats have control of the South, if Democrats respect the rights of African Americans, and Republicans will avoid further intervention in Southern affairs. So let's look at that compromise. Southern Democrats say, we will respect the rights of African Americans. We will recognize Hayes as president. All we need you to do, Northern Republicans, is end radical Reconstruction and allow us to have autonomy. Both sides agree to the bargain, and Reconstruction will end. The end of Reconstruction, it seems that everybody's going to win. The North gets a little bit of this, the South gets a little bit of that. And this is true. Republicans get to maintain their power as president. The Democrats get to maintain autonomy in the South and in the House. But in reality, those newly freed slaves at the end of that bargain were in essence sold down the river. Many of the advances of Reconstruction would prove temporary. Many of the advances were swept away during a campaign of violence in the South by way of the Ku Klux Klan, by the Northern retreat from the ideal of equality for the maintain or sustainment of power by way of the presidency. And the failures of our fathers will ultimately become our problems. Reconstruction failed, and it's going to lay the foundation for future struggles to extend freedom to all Americans. This fight is not over. The issue of race is not over. But this semester is.